Alright, so today, we're gonna be checking out the newest character in NIKKE, and that is of course Bay Goddess Mary. We will be going over her skills to know what she actually does, go over the reasons why you might consider pulling for her, and also take a look at how good she is in different types of content. But before that, if you find this video useful, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and let's get on with the content. So first, I'm gonna be showing you my build for my Bay Goddess Mary. So as you can see, she is currently level 238 with attraction rank 2, with a total power of 25,810, and she is also using tier 5 manufacturer specific equipment, so all that combined gives her a little over 1 million HP, 32,700 attack, and almost 6,000 defense. And for her skills, everything is at level 4, and this is consistent all throughout my testing. So a lot of you might already be familiar with her skills, so I'm not gonna spend too much time in this section. But for her skill 1, this is a passive skill that activates when your team enters full burst. Basically, this will heal your whole team based on a certain percent that scales with her maximum HP. And the more times you enter full burst, the higher the value will be, and this caps out at 3 times. And then, her second skill is another passive that activates whenever she uses her burst. And this skill is only going to affect your water code allies. For this one, it's going to increase the damage dealt if the enemy is weak against water. So the main things that you need to keep in mind is that this will only affect water type allies, and this will only be effective against enemies that are weak to water. And just like her skill 1, this will also scale depending on how many times you hit the skill condition. So moving on, we have her burst, and this one only has a 20-second cooldown. Similar to her skill 2, this will only affect water code allies, and this will increase their attack, plus it will also heal your team by a certain percent for 10 seconds. So overall, her kit does sound very specific, but in the right scenarios, it can be really good. So now that we know what her skills can do, why should you even consider pulling for Bay Goddess Mary? At first glance, Bay Goddess Mary might seem very specific because half her kit only affects water type allies. But with that being said, her healing is actually really good compared to the other healers that we have. Because when you take a look at the other healers, their healing actually comes from their burst. And a lot of them have a 40-second cooldown. So Bay Goddess Mary having a 20-second cooldown healing on top of the healing from her skill 1 is actually a big advantage because that means that Bay Goddess Mary can output more healing compared to those characters. So even if you don't have a lot of water type characters to take advantage of Bay Goddess Mary's offensive buffs, you are still getting a ton of healing from this character. So I would say that if you're looking for an excellent healer, then Bay Goddess Mary is a really good option. And you can just think of the water character specific buffs as a bonus on top of Bay Goddess Mary being a really good healer. And moving on, let's talk about how good she is in different types of content. So for PvP, I would say that she's an okay option simply because she has a ton of healing, but the only thing is that you won't be getting a ton of value from her buffs because when it comes to PvP, we actually don't have a lot of water type characters who can really get the most value out of her skill 1. The only water type characters that come to mind that are really good are Dorothy and Privity. Both these characters are really good, but you can only really use Bay Goddess Mary with Privity. Because both Bay Goddess Mary and Dorothy have a 20-second cooldown, and they're both burst 1 units, so it sort of clashes. So if I were to rate her for PvP on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say that she is a 5, maybe 6 at best. And for the Tetra Tower, she is actually a really good option, but only in some cases. Same thing with PvP, yes you are getting healing from her kit, but you only have a few options when it comes to characters that benefit from her buffs. Because when you take a look at the water type DPS characters for Tetra, we actually only have 4. So we have Arya, Milk, Neve, and Viper. These characters are the only ones that will benefit from Bay Goddess Mary's buffs if you want to use her in the Tetra Tower. And none of these characters are what I would consider top tier, maybe except for Viper, but even then, the other Tetra DPS characters like Alice will actually do more damage even if they don't benefit from the buffs from Bay Goddess Mary. So the same thing with PvP, her healing capability for the Tetra Tower is really good, but as of right now, she actually doesn't have a lot of options when it comes to which characters she can actually buff with their skill 2 and burst. And since we are talking about the Tribe Tower, I also want to mention that pulling for a character because you want to progress in the Tribe Tower is not really the best reason to pull for any unit, maybe except for the Pilgrim Tower. Because when you think about it, you are spending so many gems just to get one character, and in return, yes they might help you push a few stages in the Tribe Tower, but you are only getting a few hundred gems and a couple of SSR molds that don't even guarantee you an SSR character. Because I see a lot of people justifying pulling for a character just because they're good on the Tribe Tower. As I just explained, is not really that good of a reason, maybe except for the Pilgrim characters because we only have a handful of them. And moving on, this is actually the best reason for you to pull for Bay Goddess Mary. And it's because of the union and solo raids. Because if you ask me, the raids are a huge part of NIKKE's endgame. So having characters that are really good for specific bosses can be really good for the long term. So just take for example the most recent solo raid that we had. We had Blacksmith as a boss, and that boss is actually weak against water. So imagine if you had Big Goddess Mary during that time. Not only will you have a really good healer, but you are also buffing your water type characters, which is really good because they are the core part of your team. So if you are someone who is already in the end game and maybe you want to take the raids more seriously, especially the solo raid, so going for Big Goddess Mary can be a really good option because inevitably we will be getting another boss that is completely countered by Big Goddess Mary and Blue Ocean Neon. And speaking of, do you actually need to pull for Blue Ocean Neon once you pull for Big Goddess Mary? I feel like Blue Ocean Neon is not really a must-have, even after you get Big Goddess Mary. Because yes, these two characters are very specific on what they can actually do, but when you compare Blue Ocean Neon and Big Goddess Mary can actually still function really well, even if you don't meet the requirements for her skills. So even if you don't have any water type characters in your team, you are still getting a lot of value because of her healing. But when you take a look at Blue Ocean Neon, her main role is a DPS, but a lot of her buffs and passives are very specific to which type of enemy she is actually good against. So as you can see, her skill 1 increases damage to enemy parts, so that means that if your enemies don't have breakable parts, then you won't be getting value from this at all. And then her second skill, it increases the damage as strong element, which means that your enemy needs to be weak against water. So for every other enemy that is not weak to water, this is actually not useful. So more than half her kit is actually useless outside of the very specific boss fights like Nihilister. So at the end of the day, you don't have to stress about getting Blue Ocean Neon because we have other water type characters that are also really good and can also deal a ton of damage. So you're looking at Brid, Privity, and maybe even Vesti. The only reason why I would recommend pulling for this character is if you're really serious about the raids. Because just like what I mentioned when it comes to Big Goddess Mary, investing in characters that are really specific can actually be a good long-term investment. Because we will most likely encounter another boss that is weak against water. So having Blue Ocean Neon in your arsenal can be really good. But if you are fairly new to the game and you're still building out your teams, I would say that you can skip this character because at the beginning of the game especially, your main goal is to collect characters that are really good for a lot of scenarios. So characters like Glitter, Modernia, and Senti, basically characters that you can slot in different teams and still work really well. Blue Ocean Neon is sort of like the opposite of that, so you are better off waiting for a character that is good for a lot of situations. So I've been taking a look at all the water type characters in NIKKE, and I feel like this is currently the best core team for Big Goddess Mary. So you have Brid, Big Goddess Mary, and Privity. And these two empty slots can be your flex slots, so just pick out whichever burst 2 character that you have, or which one's the best, and then the next slot can be very flexible. And I also feel like 3 is the sweet spot when it comes to how many water type characters you want to use with Big Goddess Mary. Because yes, you can add more water type characters so that they will be affected by her skill too, but you will actually be in a better position if you use other characters outside of the water type. Yes, I can add Viper because she is another water type character, but an even better option is to actually use Guilty. Because even with the buffs from Big Goddess Mary, Viper is still unlikely to out DPS Guilty simply because of how good Guilty is. So overall, I really think that water core teams can be really good, especially once Blue Ocean Neon is in the game. So moving on, let's talk about Big Goddess Mary's energy generation. So based on my testing, you can expect to enter full burst after 12 shots or a little bit more depending on your other character's energy generation. So if your team's energy regen is on the low side, you might need a decent roll of ammo capacity increase from your equipment to actually be able to enter full burst with just 2 magazines worth of shots. But if you're using high energy regen characters like Senti, 12 shots from Big Goddess Mary should be enough. And then for her skill priorities, you would want to prioritize her burst, because a huge part of her buffs and a huge part of her healing actually comes from this. And for the other skills, it actually depends on how you want to use Big Goddess Mary. So if you are mainly using her as a healer, then obviously you would want to prioritize her skill 1. But if you feel like you don't need a ton of healing and you are using water type DPS characters, then upgrading her skill 2 first can be a really good option. And then for the cubes, you actually have 2 options. You can either go for the Resilience cube or the Wingman cube, because whenever I was testing these out, there is actually very little difference between the two. So I would say that focus first on your DPS characters and see which of your DPS characters needs which cube, and then after you sort that out, if you still have slots, then you can put in whichever cube for Big Goddess Mary. So overall, Big Goddess Mary is a really good healer, and she can also be a really good support for water type characters if you need her to be. But you don't necessarily need to stress about using water type characters with her, because just her healing alone is already good enough to make her a usable character in a lot of teams. So if you're thinking about going for her, I would say that go for it, as long as you already have established your main team, because most likely, you will mainly be using Bay Goddess Mary for the solo and union raids. So yeah, that's pretty much everything I have for this video. If you found this video useful, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.